All right, welcome to Equal Time Soccer. We are here with, I don't know how many time guest Rashida. It might only be one or two. It should have been longer at this point. A super stud, former All-American at the Gopher soccer program, now in her third stop internationally as a pro. Welcome, Rashida Beal.
Thank you. It's
And
good to be back.
and Rashida, I will say there was a little bit of dishonesty in me asking you on. There was a secret I was keeping, and it is that I am rocking my
Oh,
Rashida Beal kit. Let's
that's
do it,
awesome.
y'all. Getting my Rashida Beal on anytime I can, of course. So, Rashida, the first thing we're going to ask you for is actually some veteran advice. So, equal time followers were in the throes of the Gopher soccer season. So we are going to let you give some tips on how we should think about sort of they've been having like tough results. They're hovering maybe just below 500. I think your freshman year was about that same kind of thing. Talk about for folks who haven't been in the locker room, who haven't had to live through like a
Yeah.
struggling season like that. Talk about sort of, what it's like for an individual player, like to feel the individual pressure of, am I doing enough? But then also sort of, what does a team have to do to try and, just like if games are sort of falling the wrong way, but it's never that bad of a performance, and like, how do you tip it the other direction? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Being in that kind of situation is a bit tough that way. A little bit with this team in the last season. We finished like exactly middle of our group. And we had a bad last few games. So I've experienced that recently as well. And it's definitely like the stakes are a lot higher in the college or professional level for that. Like obviously the coaches have pressure. Like the seniors or the leaders on the team have pressure. And it's a lot of like high stakes. And sometimes I feel like that can contribute to the results where if there's like one mistake in the game, it can get into people's heads and it's hard to get out of.
Right.
So a lot of it that I've found is helpful is like you just have to focus on the game in front of you. I think that's important no matter how the season's going. Like even if you're doing really well, like just focusing on the next game, not the last one, and not like sometimes you can get into the thing looking ahead, like, oh, these next 5 games, like, well, these two we can win. This one is maybe, this one is lost, like, and we need to win. Like getting into that stuff as a player, I've never found helpful. Like it's just more stress. So I think it's better to just like really focus on the game in front and like think about that one more clearly and try to break down that strategy instead of getting too caught up in like the numbers and the analytics if you're on the team.
Right. I only laugh so hard because I'm constantly doing shit like that.
Yeah.
Teams, I'm always like, well, they play Rutgers and that's going to be a tough test, but then they have Maryland and then there's Illinois, and just constantly being such a fan about it. And it's like, as a player, that's just the least helpful mindset to have. It's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, I did that last season, and two of the games that I said, "Oh, we'll win those," we lost and tied. And whereas another game that's like, "Oh, that's a maybe," we like won out of the park. So like, I do that also, but I just find that that's like one of the worst tactics to use.
Do you think, and the impact of that, like as a player, do you think part of it is when you go and sort of counting the win, like assuming it'll be a win, do you think you actually are sort of changing the way you're playing then, like subconsciously? Is it sort of, does it change preparation even at sort of the root level? Or is it just something where you just can't take it for granted? Or does it actually, do you think, sort of change the way you actually sort of are using your brain because subconsciously you've already thought like, all right, this is in the bag, we got this one?
I mean, I definitely think it has an effect on how people like prepare for the game. Like when you think it's going to be a hard game, you prepare one way, like you're thinking, oh, we're the underdogs. Oh, we need to bring our top game. And what you don't realize sometimes is if you're looking at a game like, oh, that's a win for us, the other team's looking at it the other way.
Right.
So they're like, maybe they're coming in like super hard. They've been really focused on it. They're like at their top, like energy level. And you're like, oh, it's important, but we'll be okay. I think you can get caught off guard, especially in the beginning of the game. And then even if you are the better team, it feels like sometimes you can have a hard time playing up to your level because you like didn't start out well, maybe you didn't warm up well, and like the other team kind of catches you off guard, and then you're trying to like suddenly get into the right frame of mind and like play your style, and just
Right.
I don't know that I think that's when then they'll capitalize on mistakes sometimes, or just like the game ends up being a lot different than you thought. So I mean, it's hard to do because like there are just some teams you look at and you're like, oh, they're always in the top. Like that's a hard game, that's a game, and there's just other ones that they're the bottom team. So it's hard to convince yourself that it's a tough game or whatever. But I feel like that's part of the discipline
Right.
in your preparation, and like because it makes a difference. Like I said, even at this level, I saw we had a struggle with that last season.
Right. Well, and it's clear. I mean, it's the reason it's it just is clearly hard for our caveman brains to handle. Like we clearly just can't get up for every single game unless you're really locked. It takes so much discipline, like you're saying. And you've been in so many different situations now at the pro level. You've been in multiple countries, multiple leagues. I'm sure your roles have changed a little bit. I don't know if you heard the whole question. You've been in multiple countries now, multiple spots. What have you seen? For those who haven't followed you, you had that stint in the Bundesliga too, although that was right before COVID. That was sort of like brutal timing. You had the stint in Romania with the Champions League club there, which is sort of the colors of this kit, and then you're in Turkey now. Let's see if Rashida comes back.
I can still hear you. Okay.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so you're
yes, I can still hear. I might be.
Okay, great. That's great. Now I won't have to repeat my question. And so you're in Turkey now. Talk about sort of the differences of what all these situations are like for you as a player. Sort of what of the different. I think people probably don't appreciate just like how how many things might be similar in terms of maybe the rough level of pay or the rough amount of like housing accommodation or whatever, but there's so much difference in sort of how clubs approach like overseas players too. Talk about, now that you've had multiple stops, what are some sort of differences you didn't really expect where leagues are so different or clubs are so different from each other? But then also, are there things that you were surprised that were sort of really similar, even though you're in completely different countries? Well, let's see if Wi-Fi comes back. Can you hear us, Rashida? Let's see if she hops back in.
Okay,
Hello.
I'm back in. I just turned off my Wi-Fi because it was going in and out. But I think I heard your question, which is kind of the talking about like some of the differences or what it's like playing in multiple countries.
Yeah, and even stuff that you've been surprised that happens to be similar too. That even though you're in a completely different place.
Yeah, I mean, every experience I've had has been pretty different, and I guess what I'll say is there's always kind of like give and take in the situation, like where let's say one team like maybe doesn't have as much like gym access and like some things like facility wise, like maybe the housing is a little better, whereas in another place maybe the accommodations aren't as good. But
props to Rashida for trying to make this work, by the way. Could you hear us? Let's see. Can you hear us, Rashida? This is across the globe show production. This is high stakes stuff. This is great. We'll see if she comes back. Yeah, so for those who haven't been tracking, she had a stint just before COVID hit in the Bundesliga too, and then was, I don't want to say stuck, but stuck in Germany during the early parts of the quarantine, and then had a really successful stint in Romania with the Champions League club there, and got to play in Champions League that same season that Molly Fiedler also made a Champions League appearance. So that was sort of a fun week where they were both getting to play on sort of that global stage. And then this is their second stint at that club in Turkey, and I believe it's sort of like a sort of beautiful coastal town. So a fun stint for Rashida there. And I think we were asking her before, I'll just keep vamping in case she's able to hop back in. I think one thing that's been surprising talking to so many pro players is just, like she mentioned, there's a lot of give and take where a club might sort of have a shinier housing option for you, but then it's really hard to get transportation to the field, or maybe they pay well, but they don't include things like housing or stuff like that. I think it's just as these leagues develop overseas, and they invest in international talent like Rashida, there just ends up being a lot of wild cards at play of, how they sell the club to you, what the experience is, what you choose to prioritize at any given time. And so I think the clubs are trying to sort of, build their way into having a full, well-rounded support. What's up, Rashida? I will say too, before this cuts out, we appreciate the effort you're putting into it. This is good. I love it.
It's super annoying when this, like, the internet situation, but okay, so just let me know what the last thing that you heard was.
Yeah, I think, well, you talked about there's a lot of give and take. Like a club might have a strong, on the field situation, but tough to get gym time, or housing might be good, but transportation is tough. And so it seems like it's kind of like you're sort of picking your, picking which things you prioritize.
Yeah, like, after my experience in Romania, I definitely wanted like more of a difficult league. So obviously that means it's harder to be on like one of the best teams that like goes to the Champions League or fights for the Champions League spot. But in reality, like the Champions League, when you're on a smaller team like that, it's going to be 2 games. Then
a tough one. I do think what Rashida was speaking to is when a league like Romania, where you're the top team, you'll beat up on basically everyone through league play, and then you'll be stuck not being tested until you get to Champions League, and then it's a 2-game test where you don't have time to sort of develop your chops much. And I think that is a big tough thing to work through. And I think that's honestly true of almost all of those European leagues. I think people probably don't appreciate that it's the Champions League teams. What's up? I think that you mentioned the being on one of those Champions League teams can just be sort of a double-edged sword of like the league games end up being almost too easy, and then the Champions League games almost end up being too hard. There's like no sweet spot.
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I haven't found it exactly yet. But I mean, I like enjoyed my experience here a little bit more in the spring, at least.
Yeah. And I think your 3 stops are also 3 very different places to live. What's that been like for you as, someone who grew up in Wisconsin, went to college in Minnesota, have sort of been a Midwest person? What have those places been like to live in just as a resident?
A lot different than the US for sure. I think you have to just like get out of your mind.
Yeah. Is it? And I think at this point you've been living the pro overseas life long enough that you've had sort of a pretty well-rounded idea of like what the experience is like. What are some things that are maybe sort of the most surprising to you compared to what you expected going into it? When you went into it, I don't know how many different countries you imagined yourself living in and playing in, and what the different leagues would be like, what soccer would be like. What are some things that are sort of the biggest surprises to you, having been through so many, different stints over there?
I would say just like learning some cultural things like about how other people live around the world. I would also say that I learned to appreciate a lot
This is great. If there's one standard viewer who's been staying this whole time, if you happen to be on Facebook, feel free to drop in some comments. I'll respond to your questions, or we'll get Pounce. We'll get Pounce over here for sure. We'll do one more try, maybe. We will link, and for those who are tuning in, I'll throw some links in this thread of sort of places where Rashida's been featured. She had a really cool interview that got featured in Goal. They did interviews with maybe a handful of women's soccer players, and it was a huge, huge feature about her last year, about her experiences doing tryouts in the NWSL, what her experiences dealing with some personal challenges in her family, her experiences going through medical rehab. For those who have seen our shows with her before, she did a personal sort of video series about her knee surgery recovery, and it was just super well done and sort of a cool look into what it's like to, be an athlete and go through that type of physical challenge. And so we'll link to that below too, just so folks can see it. And especially that Goal feature was sort of a cool thing by Goal to do that type of a thing. I think players who, unless you're in, London, like playing in the Women's Super League, or if you're in the NWSL, I don't think many other teams and athletes get covered like that from big time outlets. So it was fun to see Rashida featured in that, rather than only on shows like ours. I know Rashida's going to give it one more go with her computer. So we'll wait just another few minutes to see if she's able to get in. I think, for other folks who are interested in, Minnesotans playing overseas, I know we've tried to highlight these folks. We're going to try and get all of them in for another round of shows. So Hannah Cade, I believe, just finished her season in Iceland, helped her team win promotion to the top division there. Let's give it one more go. What's up, Rashida? Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us? We can hear you.
I'm trying my computer. We'll see if that works better at all.
I love it.
Yes, this internet's really annoying.
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Nice. This is probably easily the most effort anyone has ever put in to try and keep a show going, myself included. So Rashida deserves a medal for this, for sure. This is great.
It's coming.
Let's see if it hops back in. I can hear you now. This is great.
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, cool. So I think when I think let's jump in and talk a little bit about, I think I'm really curious about whenever I talk to a player who's considering going overseas and considering going pro, I'm always kind of surprised either like what sources of information they have or not much information to go off of, or like how blind that choice sometimes is. And I'm curious, all the way back when you were making that call to continue playing and decided to go overseas, I can't remember, who were you talking to at that time? Like, what information did you have to go off of sort of what it was like, or where to go, or what to try? Like, did you have former teammates or other players you talked to, or just, your agent at the time? Like, what information was there even available? Because I don't know that it's always super easy to research, that type of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I made that decision after spending several months as a reserve. So it was initially something I didn't pursue in terms of going overseas. Right. But when that time came, I was working with an agent at the time, but I was also just contacting anybody that I could that I thought would be helpful. So like obviously I talked with my former coaches like in Gopher soccer, and like they connected me with people. There's like a coach slash some sort of director at the club I played in high school, and she played overseas and is like really involved with a lot of things but women's soccer, and she's been a helpful resource even back then.
Is that Shannon Smith?
Yeah, it's Shannon.
Yeah, she's for those who don't know, didn't she have appearances like with the Ireland national team or something?
Yeah, and she played like 5 years in Norway in the first league.
Yeah.
So she was like a helpful resource and still is for me for a lot of things. But basically it's just like trying to like ask around. And the thing is though, like the more you go through it, the more people you meet. And so the more like connections you have. So now when I'm looking to do something or like find out about something, I can ask one person and they probably know whoever or whatever I'm talking about, or they know someone. Like the sort of world is really small and interconnected. So if there's like, for example, if my team was like, oh, we're looking at this American, like, do you know her? I might not know her, but if I ask a friend, they either know her or their friend knows her and can like give information. So it's a pretty like small little world. And like at first, I mean, even if you ask around, like the first time you go, it's usually going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but the more people you meet and know, like then the more resources you have like moving forward.
I think I've sent like at least a couple players your way, or I can think of at least one fairly recently where I just ask you if you're game to be sort of a sounding board for a player who's thinking about doing their first stint over there. When you talk to players like that, like someone who's never done it and is asking you stuff from scratch, what are some of those first questions they ask you? Like what's some of the stuff that they're, trying to dig into to find out more about?
I mean, a lot of times they ask them general questions, which is really difficult because like it really depends. Because I know like one of my friends from a summer league is finally in Sweden now after like taking her extra years and whatever from college. And I remember talking to her about it sometimes, and I'm like, well, what specific questions do you want to know? Or like, what specifically do you want to know? Because I can't, if you're like, how is this or that? Well, it depends. What country are you looking at? Which league are you looking at? Now, if you ask me how is the second league in Sweden, I can talk to my friends who played there and tell you something more specific. But like in general, it's very hard to answer because my setup in Turkey is going to be a lot different than, you know, a first league setup in Germany or something like that. So it's the more that you know, like if you're like, oh, I'm looking at these two ideas, what have you heard about each league or each one of them? Then I can like find out some information. But if it's just general stuff, it's like very hard to answer because seriously, everything is super different and different teams, different leagues, different countries, like everything's way different.
Right. Well, and I think especially, I think people probably don't appreciate just like when you were in Romania, I think it's somewhat common if you get signed by the one team that's investing in overseas players and then you're just like crushing everyone in league play. Like that actually is sort of a norm in a lot of European countries. Like if you play for the top team, you might not have competitive games like week in, week out. But if your priority is like getting minutes or like getting to the Champions League, then maybe it makes sense.
Yeah.
Versus like you're making your choice now to try and get sort of competitive league games like week in, week out. It depends sort of what stage of the decision making you're in too, I bet.
Yeah. And I mean, in my opinion, it's a good experience to have, like obviously to be on a Champions League team at some point or another, which for most of us means it's going to be a smaller like country. I don't think that's like a terrible experience to have, especially if you're like 1 or 2 years out of college, but it's just like personally not aligned with my goals and my personality at this time. So like it was the option I had at the time, and I definitely grew a lot there because my team was good and like the trainings were good and the quality of the players on my team, it was good. It's just like it's a little frustrating being like across the world and winning games 10-0 like personally.
Well, and I think, I'm really curious. I know the last time we had you on, and even when you and I've spoken before, part of what you've talked about is just, when you were in those, for those who don't know, you've been in multiple times with NWSL training camps. You've played with, against the Becky Sauer runs of the world. When you were in your recent attempt to get back into the show, I mentioned that really cool feature in goal that you had last year, which there were so many really cool nuggets that you shared in there about just being authentic about like, yeah, it was pretty intimidating, like playing against literal World Cup stars, going from being like a fairly comfortable like stud in my college program to then going to a pro team where it's like, holy shit, everyone here is the very, very best. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing heavily. And so but you being authentic enough to say like, yeah, there was a difference. Like there's a difference between, being in a system for 4 years where you get comfortable, know your role, maximize your role, and then you shift. I'm curious now, when you look back at if, we had you watch a random tape from like your senior year at the U or even just like earlier in your pro career, what are some of those things that of your personal game on the field that you think have sort of changed the most, grown the most, whatever, like that if you watched an old game, you'd be like, oh my God, I don't do that anymore.
Well, I have watched my film from my senior year since several times.
Of course you have.
And I'm like, oh, I was not very good. But like I even have sent like different clips to Steph and to Crystal like since then, and they've been like, oh my God, I never would have thought you could do that. But the main like thing has been obviously not my defending. It's been like things on the ball. So just general like composure and sort of like confidence on the ball. I don't necessarily think that I couldn't execute like, certain passes or certain touches. I just think that in college I was very like not composed and not comfortable on the ball.
Yeah.
And so it's not that I think like my skills have gotten like so much better, but I think my composure and comfort, like handling the ball in the back, has definitely improved. I mean, I'm sure some of those technical aspects have improved a little, but a lot more of it has just been the vision. And it's something that I'm still like working on. And it's not where I want it to be, but I think it's much different. I also like had to work on it for like a year straight when I was injured before. I spent hours like with the wall and cones and ball. I had no other option when I couldn't like play. So I think those are the sort of main things that I've seen myself grow in, but I also still see moments where I'm like, when I watch it back, I'm like, oh, I could have done something a little different to keep the ball instead of kind of like panicking for a certain pass or whatever the case. Like there's still those moments, but I think that's been like the biggest difference.
Right. Well, it's also, that's the sort of thing that really jumps out on film or when you're watching a game, like the composure on the ball is like one of the first things I notice about a player or not, because it can be so obvious. Like if someone has a lot of that confidence and composure, it just jumps out when others don't, so it's like that contrast factor of like, if you go back and watch a game, you'd be like, oh my God, settle down. What's going on? Like you just watch yourself and be like, I would never be that like urgent or that like frantic or whatever.
Yeah. And it's not that I necessarily like turned the ball over a lot in college. I really didn't, but I just like, and like there's moments when I think I could have like turned out of something or I could have like faced up or just like challenged myself with the pass I chose. And I still don't like make super crazy passes like or do anything wild, but I think I look for the opportunity to like face up if I win the ball, like a through ball. I don't always pass it back to the goalkeeper. Like sometimes I pass to another defender or I turn. It depends the situation.
Right.
And the one thing, which is actually something that Steph and Crystal tried to get me to do more in college, is after essentially winning the ball, especially if it's played through, and if I do lay it back, being that option. And I have gotten it back in situations where I do not want it back, but I opened up and I was available. Whereas in college, like I wasn't normally. So that's like one small thing, but it is a little hard to do after you like sprint 45 yards and like battle someone and then pass it back to like get it back immediately. It's a little difficult, but
you're like, give me a break, man.
I'm like, you can't pass it to the other side, like right back at me when she's still here. Okay.
Well, talk a little bit about that, more about that in terms of, I think one thing, you know, folks who watch the college game and then the pro game, or like, you know, Jenny Clark is a great example of another former, you know, All-American Gopher who went and played overseas. And she said the biggest challenge for her was just how different the college game is than the pro game in terms of college teams, because there's 2 games a week. The season is so quick. You have to get freshmen to be able to play. Generally felt a lot more systematized to her. The idea of sort of, you know what your role is, you know what the team is meant to do. Like, it's maybe, I don't want to say more limited, but the idea of being like a set system versus in the pros, you're not always going to have that sort of set system to fall back on all the time. Have you felt that same kind of transition where maybe like your role was slightly more defined at the college level and then you're asked to do just more, like, is it more processing or more different things? Or you mentioned sort of playing out the back and having to be that option, but has that felt the same to you, where maybe the college side is more systematized versus the pro side, or has that not been as big of an adjustment on your end?
I mean, position wise, or kind of my role in the team, not really.
Okay.
A little bit in Germany, but it's like that was so short. It's really hard for me to see like how everything would have gone with that. But I mean, to some extent, like in Romania, yeah, I mean, I played center back, I played right back in a 4-back, and then I played for the whole fall part, I played right back in a 3-back. And they just like completely changed our system from the spring to the fall because like essentially we had 3 center backs that he all wanted to play. So he just put us as the 3-backs and I played that. But I mean, here, like my role is like pretty defined. The only thing that changes it, obviously, in this case, is injuries. And that's the same on our team. Like, obviously, if certain players are not available, then they'll make adjustments. But I mean, maybe there's a little bit more movement with that on the attacking front. But I mean, for me here, it's pretty consistent. But I will say the way that they kind of run the season is, at least my last like couple years in college, was like very like strictly planned. Like, this is our training load, heart rate goal or whatever for every single training session, based on every single game, based on the whole season. And like here, it's not like that. This season so far, it's definitely better. Like, we got a new coach and he came from like a U18 boys team. So he does know soccer and like knows what he's doing. But I think it's like, it's not so like scientifically planned out. And we don't obviously have the same resources in terms of like gathering everybody's heart rate data and like consulting someone with the same kind of educational background as like Corey and whatever else. So that is a little hard because sometimes I know like maybe what we should be doing based on certain things and it's like not what's happening and then like whatever. So that kind of aspect is definitely not as like organized and kind of strict as the college side. And when I think like a lot of players don't realize that, like, especially Division I and like at the top conferences, it's very professional. Like the conditions you're in are extremely professional. So when you go play somewhere else, like that to you is the norm, or you think it should be even better than that. And like 90% it's not. Obviously there are teams. Yeah. Barcelona, I'm sure, has amazing facilities and whatever, but like most of the teams are not like that overseas. So you have to kind of like change your mindset about conditions, I would say.
Yeah. I remember, Emily Heslin, another Gopher, talked about that when she was in Israel. She would like do the team trainings, but it wasn't like hard enough for her like Terminator mindset. So then she'd be like working out on like an outdoor gym on the beach, like in her spot in Israel and stuff, like just doing random extra shit to like fill out her day and stuff. Yeah. Because we're so used to having like the training room and the like the recovery room and all the resources and stuff, and it's just not always the norm for sure. Well, we do have a couple of questions. I did reach out to a few former teammates, and these could be from anyone. We don't know who these came from, Rashida. We do have 2 questions. The first one is, what were your first impressions of Maddie Castro when you met her?
Oh, I didn't like her.
Speak on that. Give us some 3 dimension on that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say she is like literally my best friend now. I was in her wedding. She's my best friend. But when I first met her, you know, I'm a junior. She comes in as a freshman. Automatic dislike because it's like new freshman, annoying, whatever. And yeah, she was just super friendly and bubbly, and like that just annoyed me at the time. I just was like, I didn't hate her, but I just was like, that girl's kind of annoying. Like, I don't like her. But you know, over time, she slowly grew on me. And when we had neuroanatomy together and she would drive me on her moped, that definitely helped her standings.
You freaking nerds. Of course, that's what you bond over. You're like a 3-time academic, everything. All of you freaking nerds, and Maddie's down there working, you know, gonna eventually work for NASA or whatever. All of you brainiacs, of course. And this is another question. Again, this question could have come from anyone. How did you feel about Emily Heslin forcing you to be her friend?
You know, she had a good strategy. She came in, first of all, she asked me for advice on something I was good at, which was psychology, by the way. That was my major, and I guess she was struggling with intro to psychology. So she asked me for my assistance to get her grade up from like a D to like a B. And I agreed to help her. And in turn, she brought me my favorite candy, which is like Reese's peanut butter cups, but the shapes. So it was like the pumpkin ones. Mm-hmm. Those have more peanut butter, so they're better. Okay. So she brought me those like every time I helped her, and I would like, I don't even remember exactly the strategy I used, but she would just like do the practice questions, and then we'd like talk through the answers, and like I'd give her little tips for how to remember, whatever the case. And we did in fact get her grade up several grades. And on top of that, we have a little game, and she would play this game with me. And I love these little like word games kind of things. And so then we started doing this all the time. That helped. Basically, the game, it's like if you can pick only one, but you don't just give your answer. You need to justify your answer. Mm-hmm. So if you're like, you can pick only one side to eat for the rest of your life. Like, what side do you pick? And like, so we'd go back and forth on it and be like, well, potatoes, because potatoes can be mashed potatoes, they can be French fries, they can be cubed potatoes, they can be chips. That's all potatoes. You know, like we'd have to, and she'd have to like defend your answer. And then she'd always have good points. She'd be like, well, what about this? And so then we'd go back and forth on it. So we played that game sometimes like before practice or like traveling or whatever. And, you know, that made me like her as well, because I thought that was an interesting game.
Right. So I guess the real question is potatoes your answer?
I mean, I haven't specifically thought about that question in a while, but like, yeah, it seems pretty versatile to me.
It is. I might choose salad. I don't know.
Ugh. I can go without salad for sure. But yeah, you can have a lot of different types.
I think Rashida disagrees with my call. I think she disagrees. See, here's the difference, Rashida. Someone like me has to eat things like salad in an attempt to remain moderate. Someone like you can eat all the potatoes you want because you are absolutely jacked. So you can just like potato yourself to death because you're like, you know, just like crushing it in the weight room. I have to eat salad to be healthy.
Yeah, I mean, salad is like a good healthy option, but like, you know, taste-wise, like satisfaction, it's low.
The hardest I've ever had on this show, for sure. This is all right. We are going to jump into even more serious questions. Rashida, you are a globetrotter. You have lived in multiple countries. We are going to throw some global trivia your way about the 3 countries.
I'm going to be terrible at that.
No, they're very simple questions. So based on these are all questions based on just how the 3 countries you've played and lived in are. So amongst Turkey, Germany, and Romania. So we are going to see if you can rank them, and we'll go category by category. There's only a few. Don't worry. This will not be grueling.
All right, we'll see about that.
First one, and some of these are actually really close. So first one is, what do you think the largest to smallest are in terms of population of those 3 countries?
You know, I got to think about that because Turkey, landmass, huge. The land of it is huge. But, like, how populated is it? I don't know. I'm going to go Turkey, Germany, Romania.
Yes, nailed it. By the way, it sounds like you're eating a pumpkin Reese's right now out of the box or something.
No, I wish. They don't have Reese's peanut butter cups over here. It's just water.
That's a very specific water container. I'm not sure what's going on. We will. So you DM us your address, and equal time we'll send you peanut butter cup pumpkins for sure.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Next question: life expectancy. Who do you think has the longest to shortest life expectancy? Germany, Turkey, and Romania.
All right. So here's the thing. In Turkey, like everybody smokes cigarettes.
Cool.
I can't imagine that helping you.
But,
now, yeah. I'll also say it was very common in Romania and in Germany as well. But
right.
German culture is like really strict about things, I feel like, and they have pretty good healthcare. So I'm going to say Germany, Romania, Turkey.
Close. Turkey is above Romania, but Germany is the top.
I almost said that.
And let's just out of nowhere, I would have no idea how to guess these numbers. How do you think Germany's life expectancy is? Let's see if you get
like maybe like 80.
81, over 81. That you called it. You're very smart, obviously. So you sort of hinted at this earlier. We are going to, can you rank them by land mass? So geographic size. Obviously, you had a minor in geography. We know that. I'm making it up.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's probably true. So can you rank them?
Okay, Turkey is definitely the biggest. It's huge, like absolutely huge.
Mm-hmm.
Like Romania, it's pretty small, but like I'm gonna say Turkey, Romania, Germany.
Oh, you mixed up. Germany is bigger than Romania. Germany is bigger than Romania, although 300,000 square miles for Turkey, 140 for Germany, 90 for Romania. I know people are jotting this down, so it's important that I say it. And last, of course, least important is the soccer-related question. Do you know the FIFA rankings for the women's national teams, which would be highest to lowest of Germany, Romania, and Turkey?
Germany, Turkey, Romania.
I'm a little confused about
this.
Romania is 40th. Germany is second. So Germany is the highest.
Yeah.
I did not find a ranking for Turkey. So I don't know if they are not, they have not played enough games, or are they not fully
suited? I don't know.
So who knows?
But I would think that they're better. So I don't know.
you got every top answer right. So we're going to say you got every single question right, Rashida. That's what we're going to say.
Yeah, the top answer was the only one we're worrying about, of course. The first one.
And lastly, so how long does the season go in Turkey? What's the timeline of, would you ever be back in the States again? Or how long will you be crushing it over in Turkey?
So presumably the season starts this weekend. And I think that my roommate said the idea was to have it be done by the end of April, because there's a Muslim holiday with fasting, like in May. Okay. And it's like a highly Muslim population. So like a lot of the girls like do the fasting. And I remember last season that was a bit difficult, obviously. Right. And that's like a league wide, obviously there's a lot of Turkish players league wide. So that's something that affects everybody. So I think even the playoffs are supposed to be done by then. So like potentially May.
So spring, maybe we'll see you back spring, summer in the US, and you can have all the peanut butter pumpkins we can muster. Rashida, easily the most effort any guest has ever put to appearing on this show by a factor of 10. We will be following the Turkish league the best we can over there. You are for sure an equal time all-star, a multi-time appearance for you. And we'll keep trucking along. We're going to talk to some of your other pros this fall if we can. But thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. And next time I'll just use my laptop, because obviously that functioned much better than the phone situation. Now I know. So hopefully the next time will be less stressful.
But people got me vamping, which is so important that they get it. That's great. All right. We'll see you, everybody.